Thank you. In fact, that increases the pressure on me to keep the quality same or higher. May I get the slide changer, please? So I thank PAS and PRIO for having me here. It's a real privilege. Thank you. Some parts of it are part of my PhD thesis. So Professor Balakrishnan was my thesis supervisor. So as we were discussing in the morning, so first of all, since morning we discussed conventional weapons, nuclear, AI, cyber, chemical, satellite warfare, AI, autonomous robots, and all that, and explainable AI. Each one of them is complex in itself, and to ensure ethical issues with each one of them are getting more and more complex. And it coincidentally so happens that I'm integrating all of that into one big system of systems, and the ensuring the ethical issues there, I suppose, are going to be exponentially harder. So what we discussed in the morning was how the opponent learns your vulnerability. In the context of cyber, we were discussing, and it's so true. So ISTAR, as most of you would know, is intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance. So slowly, over a period of time, the adversary learns your vulnerabilities and the threat increases, and then you try to patch it up. Whether you reveal it or not, he will learn. And no, so then effectiveness goes higher and this cycle continues. The aim is obviously to keep the peaks as spread over as possible and as low as possible. So you contain the damage and reduce the frequency of damage. So, I mean, this is not really future. We are already seeing it in the context of all the recent wars, that swarms of UAVs are going to be in decisive roles. Space assets could possibly be compromised, and you need to have time-sensitive targets and hence very quick sense-to-shoot actions using autonomous weapons. So what you're going to need is what I call as gourmet ISTAR, because you need to have long periods of immersion over geographical areas. Temporal issues are going to play a big role. You have to have AI signal processing, big data analytics, as Mr. George spoke about, and information fusion. So C6ISTAR, so basically we already had command and control with ISR long back, then computers got in and communication got in. Combat systems, relatively new addition, and then cyber, the most recent addition. So while all this is evolving and becoming more complex, the fundamental nature is still that there is something at the front end, there are some sensors, there are some weapons, and they are connected to the back end in some sense to command and control station. The weapons may become higher, more and more precision. The sensors may get higher resolution, more spectral resolution, and so on. But the fundamental nature, what was proposed in the data fusion model of Joint Directorate of Laboratories, still more or less remained the same. So there were sources which were feeding to the backend, and then there were multiple layers of fusion, cognitive refinement for human to intervene, and then process refinement. And the intelligence data gets into some kind of database. So this was more or less the architecture. It was getting more and more evolved, but the fundamental nature, and JDL model is just one of those many models, but this is a very canonical model. The kind of things that we are getting into now, the scale and the level of autonomy is a paradigm shift, and that model no longer scales. So the seventh C that I have added there is cooperative C6ISTAR, which looks at fundamentally new way to the architectural communication and the algorithmic aspects. So this is the architecture that I'm proposing. If you look at the nature, at the base of it, it's still the same: forward zone, backstage, command and control, intelligence data, and the smart weapon systems. But there is no circle there. Now it is a cloud to indicate the fog is thickening and the nature is changing fundamentally. And now what we also want is, because of the AI, uh, sometimes your weapon systems might need access to the intelligence data directly. They may be connected directly without a human there. Cyber resilience and cyber security, of course, are important aspects. So this is a very, very simplified model of the forward zone. You have multiple agents there. The change that comes because of these small drones and a large number of them is that, first of all, it's impractical to have a centralized control. You can't have hundreds of drones communicating to the command and control station wirelessly. They may not have range. They may not have the power. I mean, the battery power may not be enough to send the data to the backstage. So in some sense, they have to talk to each other, figure out what to do, summarize the data, because you still want at least human on the loop, even if not human in the loop. The final button you still want human to press. So in some sense, they have to cooperate, and they have partial and local view of the entire battlefield or the surveillance field. So they have to aggregate that, summarize it, use some kind of relay agents, figure out, and they will be very vulnerable. The batteries may fail, the drones may get killed. Because of mobility, who's your neighbor now may not be your neighbor at the next second. So all of these has to be managed dynamically without a centralized control. So I'm going to skip this part as to how do you model this whole chaotic situation. Proposing one model, there could be many others. But more important part is that now we are adding to the complexity that your space assets are compromised, so you may not know your position very accurately. However, you want to know your position very accurately because you want to know where the target is, in addition to what it is. How do you handle that situation? Maybe there are beacons which are precisely located, and with reference to that, somehow you're trying to figure out your own location, for which you may need triangulation. By single radio, you probably can't do that. So these are all the complications that get added to what we already had. Now coming to the backstage, when you wanted to task a sensor to collect some data earlier, probably you command a particular platform to take off, go to a particular location, point the sensor to in a particular direction, and get some imagery or any other data, audio, anything. However, now the backstage potentially probably doesn't even know who's there on the field. What drones are there? What are their IDs? It's impractical when you have like hundreds of drones. You may not even know their network addresses individually. So you now need to send a command, tasking command, to the forward zone, to the network. You can't send it to an individual drone. And probably there's one drone which is carrying camera, the other drone is carrying some chemical sensor, somebody is carrying an acoustic sensor. You don't know who's carrying what. So now you will probably formulate, this is one thing which I have proposed, there are many other ways of doing it, but in some sense it will have to be this, that you formulate the problem statement in a kind of probabilistic graphical network. In this case, it happens to be a Bayesian network, which gathers data from those individual nodes. So the network figures out by itself, by local message exchanges, the data is collected, the problem statement is given, it's aggregated there on the spot, and the result is sent back. So there are some details in this which I'm skipping for want of time. So how this whole thing is proposed. But so now revisiting the data fusion model that we saw earlier gets changed to this now. So essentially, in the forward zone, the source preprocessing, which is basically handling the sensor biases and noises and all of that, and some part of lower level fusion, happens right on the field now. It does not come back to the backend. And then there is an architectural domain which is totally to deal with the networking aspects. It has nothing to do with the application. Dynamic topology management, you need to know who's where and how, where are you sending the data for aggregation, what is your information sharing strategy, whether you're doing a time division multiple access, frequency division multiple access, which frequency you're communicating on so that neighboring communications do not collide. All of this has to be decided autonomously. And in the we have a book chapter also on this, and my thesis, we have proposed few strategies. Again, they are not the only strategies. There are many other researchers working on this. And then education and pedigree. So you need to know what is valid, what is invalid. The sensors may have failed. Somebody may be deliberately injecting some incorrect information. So how do you ensure that all of that is happening correctly? And that's a networking aspect, not so much the application aspect. And then the higher level fusion happens at the back end. With external sources could be open source intelligence, human intelligence, and various other forms of intelligence. Now, I think Mr. George was talking about the BigInt data, and this is one of the frameworks, which is incidentally also followed by, I think, the US Navy and few other militaries, where at the bottom you have secure cloud storage. This could be actual cloud or it could be intranet for security. So we will have full motion video, imagery, and so big data in its industrial or IT form means it has at least 4 V's: the velocity of the data, the volume of the data, the variety of data, and veracity, uncertainty of the data. So this data has all of those aspects. So you have satellite imagery, UAV imagery, signal intelligence, human intelligence, open source intelligence, everything. There's no single format. You don't know when you want to fuse the data. How do you fuse when somebody says that I saw this target near some tower? What is that near definition? Is it 10 meters, 100 meters? What is the uncertainty? Need to take all of those factors into account. So modeling is important. And the architecture is going to be no longer a simple architecture. So what is proposed here is a microservices-based architecture, which is agnostic to programming language, agnostic to the underlying technology. And this is very scalable. Scalable in terms of number of users, scalable in terms of number of weapons, and everything. So you just need more and more machines, and you can form clusters and add on practically all type of inference, including the fusion. So you can do what is traditionally called as services orchestration. You can combine many services to form another service, and so on. So when this happens, so we have moved away from this simple fusion database to this complex BigInt exploitation framework. And when that happens, then at the back end, you do not have those simple databases, but you have a distributed common intelligence exploitation framework, which is what I'm calling a C7ISTAR backstage. So this is how the future information fusion architecture will probably look like. Human is still there, and which is why you still need data to be sent back even for explainable AI. Like when something has already happened and you want to explain it, you need data at the back end to explain. So those communication lines are extremely important. Now, when all this happens, so the seventh C cannot stand in isolation. It will have impact on the other Cs. Command and control, more than me, I think you people know the fog of war will only thicken. And you need to take probably split-second decisions, keeping in mind the acceptable level of risk and addressing the ethical issues. So the command and control station will have to be supported by domain-specific AI-enabled decision support system. A human probably will not be able to take those decisions that quickly, keeping in view all the risks. Impact on cyber is going to be much, much more than anything else, because as we saw, the forward zone, we are saying that no, there are hundreds of agents or maybe more in future. They're communicating wirelessly. There's no central control. They are probably failing. The new ones are getting added. They're moving. How do you know if somebody puts a rogue drone in the midst of all of this and the entire agenda is hijacked? So cyber security, cyber resilience is going to be one big challenge in this kind of a scenario. At the backstage, we are saying that you put a distributed information architecture, which is accessible by weapons, by people, by joint fighting forces at different geographical locations. Once again, that's a very, very vulnerable to any cyber attack. So you need very novel mechanisms commensurate with the scale, pace, and complexity. And supply chain, we spoke about private-public partnership. Somebody puts a wrong code in some drones and your location is hijacked and everything is hijacked. So how do you secure supply chain is going to be one big issue. So I think I have already taken my time, so I'll skip this slide. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.